So we'll go ahead and get started. And let me go ahead and capture our participant lists so we can make sure we have a record of who's with us. So I'm working from Office 365 out of my web browser. I'm on campus, but for some reason, I'm not getting access to log in from here. So I'm going to go ahead and try to get started with our class. So technically, we've been talking about exposures earlier this week in terms of the network exposures and some things you can do to mitigate exposures on the network for system security. We also use GRC and NetStat and NetSH. Can anyone recall? So what I'd like you to do now is let's go to interactive mode, if you would mind. In the chat, if you would, respond only to me. And what we'll do is have a record here. We had an uninvited guest on Monday. If you respond in chat to the instructor with details about who that guest was, and you're the first to respond, then you're the winner. So I'm going to go ahead and I don't want you to respond to everyone. Just respond to me on the screen, if you would, please, in chat. So does anyone recall who our special guest was on Monday?
Are you talking about like in the meeting?
Yeah,
or something?
In the meeting, in the class. We were demonstrating something in the class on the live systems. And we were showing you how NetStat, NetSH, GRC works. And yeah. So if you would, post your answers. And then what we'll do is we'll go back. And at the end of the class, I'm going to see who responded first. And all right. We also, so if we also talked about providing minimum access. Minimum access required for tasks on Wednesday. So in terms of reducing exposure, one of the issues that's prevalent everywhere on systems and devices is this habit where people accept, a lot of the default settings, right? And we talked about applications directories, okay? If you have a user that says they can't use the software they need to install, and they claim you have to provide them with administrator privileges, there's a simple thing you can do on that app directory to solve the problem without giving them root level permissions on that system. Once again, if you would, in chat, okay, what I'd like you to do is respond just to me. First person to respond correctly wins the prize. What is it you do if somebody's claiming, hey, my software doesn't work. I have to load this software. I'm a user. You didn't make me administrator on my machine. It's a simple thing that you do with a directory for that app. If you have the correct simple explanation, couple of words, right? If you have the answer and you're the first to provide the answer, then and I guess just for everyone's edification, never mind the prize, okay? So let's see, oh, this doesn't let me go from the specific slide. Okay. Well, let's review. If you were one of the first to answer, the first person answered that we had a Russian from the Eastern European part of the world, the section of the open internet that's managed by an organization called RIPE, R-I-P-E. We had a RIPE Russian that was sitting on our system on Monday. In fact, let's look at this. Can everybody see my screen?
Not yet.
Let's see here. Can everybody see the screen now? Can everybody see the screen?
It's loaded. Oh, now it is.
Okay, so we were showing and sharing about how NetStat gives you an idea about different exposures on different ports. We asked about 445. It turns out that that had a directory share. Remember, we set up directory shares with role-based access control. There's a simple measure that we'll talk about later called SMB signing that fixes this vulnerability. But here, hang on just a second. Here, this should ring a bell. Does everybody remember this on one of our systems?
Yeah.
Okay, so we saw that someone in the 94.232 range, that's our Russian. We did a backtrace, we did a lookup on network-tools.com. We found out that that's a network range that's from Eastern Europe and Russia. This individual was attempting to enumerate or probe by sending SYN packets, probably with Metasploit or Nmap, while we were working in class to do our live assessment, right? Later that night, my son and I set up a custom firewall rule to block that whole range of addresses, and then we sent something back to them. So sent something back their way. So yeah, here it is again. A little later in the class, instead of just establishing a session with a SYN packet and starting a session with a SYN packet, you see here the individual was able to actually lock down a session and establish a connection. So we stayed on a little later to make sure we shut them out, but a lot of value with NetStat and NetSH. As far as the app directory is concerned, you learned in the previous module how to implement role-based access control with inheritance. And in Wednesday, basically, to reduce another common part of another common exposure that happens everywhere, ultimately users will say, I can't load the software I need. And if you go to the directory where the software is installed and give that specific user full control, they do not require administrator privileges or root level privileges on the system. So that's what we've covered on Monday and Tuesday. This was just a recap to make sure. So technically speaking, this is exposures part 3. I meant to edit that, and then I ran into some snags with my software on my laptop. Anyway, let's continue. So I'm going to go ahead and so today, our objectives today, we're going to give some examples of some troublesome defaults that expose systems. Our objective today is to mitigate needless exposures that have to do with troublesome defaults. And we also want to provide you with a practical remedy of an example for a default exposure. And then we also want to take the time to call out scenarios between systems where a single resource fails. And it's called a single point of failure. And if you have a single point of failure, there's an increase in the exposure to connected hosts in that network environment, right? So we want to take some time to talk about scenarios where a single resource poses a problem. Of course, the countermeasure is to configure and test a redundant measure, right? So if one of our security exposures results from a single point of failure, what we want to do today is to call out an example and then provide an example of a countermeasure for a known exploit. Any questions before we begin about what we're doing today?
None at the moment.
Okay, so let's give examples of some troublesome defaults that expose systems. All right. We've already covered some defaults that cause huge security issues. But this one in particular that we're going to focus on today is kind of special. Can any of you recall which of our previous system defaults we've covered in class to date is a real headache? So system defaults in general are always a problem, but today we're going to specialize in one particular area. What I'm going to do here is try to. No, I guess what we'll do is we'll keep going. My apologies. I'm using this web-based version of PowerPoint, and it's really creating some headaches. Works differently than the one that's loaded on my laptop. The first account that's provisioned on a system you've already seen is an account that includes root level permissions. And on Windows servers, it's typically called the administrator account, right? And essentially, that's a real problem. Anytime you have a system default that hackers are aware of, it's almost like you can almost paint a bullseye on that particular feature or function. It's an attractive nuisance. The problem is that whenever you set up your systems, the administrator is in there. In fact, on your remote systems, we've left that in place so that you could walk through this remedy, right? Your first instinct would be, well, I'm going to set up another root account and I'm just going to delete administrator. But what we found is that, especially in domain environments, depending on the security policies that are in place, oftentimes deleting the initial root account when the OS is installed. In recent versions of Windows Server, that's hardwired as it's the system default account, and it has a special place in terms of how the kernel operates so that deletion is not possible. You try to go ahead and just delete it, it doesn't happen. So what do you do with this and how do you work in this manner? We want to describe any questions so far on what we've covered?
No.
Okay. Can anybody think of a system default with regard to networking that's a real nuisance? I know I wanted to spin off the chat and let somebody try to come up with that first. Whenever you connect with your network, there's something that's set up by default. It's a real headache. We actually went over it recently. In File Explorer, you not only get to browse your directories, but what else can you browse in Windows File Explorer? Anyone?
Just need a little bit clarity on the question, please.
Okay. Earlier this week, when we were talking about network exposures that were nuisances and defaults, we said that in File Explorer, where I am right now, you can also browse something aside from the hard disks and the system and the directories.
Other devices that's connected to the onto your shared network.
Yes, the other network devices that are connected. So you can browse the network and see an awful lot of information if NetBIOS is left in place, NetBIOS over TCP/IP. So just wanted to close that loop. We're going to keep coming back to those exposures. And let's see, can I do this from the current slide? There we go. Yeah. All right. So a practical remedy to mitigate a default exposure like the administrator account. Well, we learned that hackers like to do 5 specific things. They conduct reconnaissance. We saw that on Monday. We saw that a Russian hacker got on one of our servers and started performing reconnaissance. What's another common habit of hackers? Could we use the same strategy the hackers use to mitigate the administrator account exposure? What do hackers do once they've figured out a way to break on your system?
They try to infiltrate it.
They try to
Once they-
infiltrate it, and then do they want to stay in plain view so that you can see them on your screen? What do they try to do?
No,
What's one of their most consistent habits once they break onto a system? After they've figured out how to get in there and wreak havoc, what's one of the most common habits they perform? It's the 2 things they do. They try to establish a backdoor, and what else? Well, you just answered the question. They don't want to be seen, right? So if they don't want to be seen, what one habit do hackers perform all the time? We're going to fight fire with fire. A practical remedy is to use the adversary's strategy against them. We're going to do what hackers do. They cover their tracks. They hide. They obscure and obfuscate, right? So what we're going to do is cover the tracks, disable that nuisance, that exposure, and we're going to create a fake that we can use instead, okay? That's what we're going to do next. And in fact, one of your assignments will be to perform these very steps on your own system. So I'm going to demonstrate, and then I'd like you to try to follow along on your system remotely. And if we could have a volunteer, I want to see if you can walk through the same set of tasks, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start renaming accounts because we can't delete them. Then we'll disable, and then we'll take it a step further and create a fake account, all right? So we're going to use some camouflage in the same manner that a hacker would use to cover their tracks. And we're going to use our remote desktops. Can everybody still see my screen?
yeah.
Okay. So right here, we'll get on the host. We're on Perseus right now. Whose system belongs to Perseus in our class? Does anyone know?
I would think it's Milan, but I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Maybe team. Oh,
Yeah.
no, it's not.
No, I'm Gemini. Milan is Perseus.
Milan's
Okay.
Perseus. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do, and Milan is, It's often working some things. We're going to go to the tools menu. So we're in Server Manager on Perseus. And this is Milan's device. We're going to use the tools and we'll pull up the Microsoft Management Console for computer management. So we can go into the local users and groups. Can everybody see this?
Yeah.
Now, inside the groups, these are domain systems. So these are member servers in a domain. And if we look at the local administrators group, the domain administrators are embedded inside administrators. Here's Milan Filbert. We created a notional solution with Dr. Francois as the instructor of our course. So he's an administrator on the course, on the system. I created a separate one called STX Topper, right? But if I try to remove administrator, half the time I try to do that, if I just click on this and then try to remove it, it won't allow me to do that because it's administrator is the original account that was set up with the OS install. And it's hardwired to be a part of the administrators group. So that's the first problem. If I try to delete the account, it says, are you sure you want to delete the administrative user? No, I'm using a login for the domain that has domain administrative privileges. I may be able to perform this, but the other system administrators may not be able to do this. So if I click yes, it may go through because my login has a higher level of privilege, but typically the system administrator needs to be able to do this too. What we want to do instead is rename this. So for the time being, I'm going to rename the administrator account, and I'll name it something temporary, like temp1. That's the first step. So our first step is to rename the administrator account. Now I want you to notice the built-in account. See the description, everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and double click on this, and I'm going to copy this because that's going to be useful in just a moment, and you'll see why. I'll open up Notepad or a text editor just to trap this, so I have a place to put it. So I've renamed it temp1. Now, I can't, as I said, normal administrators on the system can't delete this. So what we're going to do next is disable it. So if we go into properties, we can disable the account. That's the next step, is to disable temp1. Now, because I've changed the name administrator, I can change guest. And I'm going to rename guest administrator. Except the description doesn't match. Does everybody see what I've done here?
Yeah.
So now I'm going to go into properties and I'm going to capture this. And I'm going to put this here. And I'm going to copy my first description. So I've got my guest description and my administrator description. And I'm going to go back to, let's see. Yeah, I want to use the what used to be the guests. I want to change this description. So I'm going to go back into here. And I'm going to paste my administering description, right? So now I have an account named administrator, but it's not really an administrator account. The description matches the original. So I've created a decoy. Meanwhile, I disabled the original account, which has an unholy level of privilege because it's the original account when the OS was installed. Again, there are hardwired kernel level privileges associated with that, right? I have another local administrator I can use if I have to, so I've created a separate one. And in this case, the name that I've used is a little unusual, but you could use something that's not so provocative, right? Something that might be associated with a system or a service, system component or a service. So it kind of blends in. The goal here is to use the same kind of tactics that the adversary does. But if I really want to take care of this, I'm going to finish the description here and finish the name to complete the process. I'm going to rename it one more time. See, I had to use a temporary name so that I could do this. If I tried to make it the guest account, guest already existed. It wouldn't let me rename because guest was already an account that was in there. Okay. I put the temp account in place so that eventually when I want to use the name guest, it's available. Does everybody understand what I just explained?
Yeah.
Originally, this was the account. And if I look at this one, it's a member of the guests group, right? So this is the original guests account. It's the original guest account that's disabled by default. So strangely, the not so vulnerable guest account is disabled and the root account with unholy levels of privilege is enabled by default. Go figure. I just don't get what Microsoft's doing sometimes, but they just want things to work. In any case, the description and the name is consistent. If I'm going to finish the ruse, I need to finish changing this description to match the original guest description. So what we're going to do here now, when someone shares their screen in a moment, I'd like you to try to delete the administrator account. You may be able to do it or may not be able to do it. I know that sometimes when I try to demonstrate things and I'm using a privileged account that's a domain administration or enterprise administration level, it'll saw right through. But in any case, now it says built-in account for guest access. Now, to add the icing on the cake, I could take this account and I could set up auditing so that, no, this account. I could take up this account and set up auditing on the fake administrator account. And then when somebody's trying to hack it and trying to log in with it, when they're trying to enable it, it's going to log entries about those malicious activities. But if they happen to break through, what is that account really a member of? Guests, right? Now, redirecting and obscuring privileged accounts in order to lock down the exposure associated with privileged account management is something that we covered in our IAM. Does everybody remember identity access management? And there was something called PAM,
Yeah.
privileged access management, right? So this is actually a method that's used in a lot of workplace environments where they try to obscure. They want to make these the defaults. Hackers are looking for the easy, low-hanging fruit. They're going to start banging away on this. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. And what I'd like to do is ask someone if they'd like to volunteer to walk through the same process. Is anyone interested in volunteering? Logging in on their remote system.
Sure.
Okay, Deanna has volunteered. Thank you, Deanna. Any questions at this point about what we've done to reduce our exposure?
No questions.
Okay. So Deanna is on her system and your system is what?
Virgo.
Virgo, that's right. And it's a domain member server. So it's part of an Active Directory domain. Can you open up Server Manager? If you just, there we go. And in the Tools menu in your upper right corner, you're going to access the Computer Management MMC. It's near the top. All right,
Wait, which one are we going to? Sorry.
Computer Management.
Okay.
And what I'm going to do now is I'm not going to coach. I want the rest of you to coach Deanna. Okay. Where's she going to go next? Come on, somebody else step up. Where does she have to find the accounts? Look on the left side.
Would it be on the local users?
Yes, local users and groups. Thank you, Schneider. Okay. So she's going to go into users. All right, what's the next step now? It would be simple enough to just delete it. Let's go into groups first and see if she's in the member of the administrators group. I want to make sure that D Hunt is listed in administrators, right? Yeah, administrators. And double click that. Yeah, you are. See how her domain account is an administrator? Cool. So let's go back to users. And then I just want to see for my own purposes if something's changed, because oftentimes Microsoft will update or change the way something works. Let's pretend we just want to delete administrator. See if you can just delete administrator. Yep. Go ahead. Okay. Remember the password. Oh, was I lying to you or not? See, Deanna is an administrator on that member server. She should be able to delete and remove that original root account. Yeah, but strangely, no, that's what's happening. Okay, click OK. So this is why we're doing what we're doing. You know, it's a well-known exposure. All right, somebody coach her. What's the first step?
You want to rename the account, rename the administrator account?
Correct.
Like you did to temp one.
Correct. Thank you, Bill. You can't name it guest because guest is already in there, but you can rename it to a temporary name. Go ahead, Deanna. Let's rename administrator with a temporary name. Oh, I like that. That's beautiful. And what would be the next thing she needs to capture from that account? If we're going to create a fake account, what do we have to remove from that account the way it sits right there?
I'm thinking the description, if possible.
Yes. Thank you, Akeem. Go ahead and open that up. And let's just, you can actually just cut the description out of there now. You can just highlight the description and use cut instead of copy, right? And then just hit OK.
Wait, I was supposed to cut it just
Yeah,
now?
yeah,
Oh.
cut it.
Let me cancel real quick. I just backspaced it.
Oh, you just backspaced it. That's all right. Yeah, we want to preserve the original description because we're trying to trick someone, right?
Right.
Okay, and now we're going to open up Notepad and just paste it somewhere. Yeah, just temporarily. All right. So did you paste it into Notepad?
Yeah, I did. I hit it afterwards.
Okay. So you could cancel that. And then what's the next step? Where's she headed next? Well, she's going to make a substitution. She's going to use
Can
another.
you
Go ahead. I know I don't mean to put you on the spot. I'm sorry.
make the like the decoy for administration in your account?
You're gonna take advantage of an existing account that's disabled right now. Can anyone tell her what to do next?
Aren't we going to disable someone? Does someone have?
Yes, at some point along the way, you're going to disable. Going to disable someone. So you can select it and then right click it and disable it. You can go into properties and then check the box that says account is disabled. There we go. And apply and okay. And we have to do something with the someone description. We have to replace it with something else. Yeah, if you have a copy of that, you can delete it. Go ahead and delete it. And then say okay. Now, if you're going to fake that the original root account is a guest account, then what do you need to do with the name of guest right now? You're going to rename it.
And that would be with the administrator, right?
Mhm. Yes, exactly. Exactly. All right. And let's capture the description from there because it still shows the guest access. We got to capture that. You're actually going to replace it with something else. So you could cut it and then add it to your text file. Okay. Nice. Almost there. You have a temporary name you set up. What do you want to change that to? The someone account. It was a temporary name. What are you going to use there now?
Yeah, we set that to guest.
Let's reset it to guest. Yep. All right. And do we have a description that matches guest?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you, Deanna. You're brave. I know that's a few steps and it was in front of an audience, but let's have a round of golf claps for Deanna. All right, good job. So let's review. She has reduced the default exposure of the root account because she's disabled the account. She's also renamed it. She's used the same kinds of tactics that the bad guys use. And she's created a fake account so that if she wants to, she can set up logs to trap an attractive nuisance in the neighborhood so she can get an early read on somebody trying to cause problems. Any questions before we continue?
I'm wondering about our now guest account that is the administrator. If somebody gets into the point where they can see what is displayed right now, can they access the guest account and then change the disabled part?
That's a great question. So Bill asked, can they get to the guest account and then change it to enable it and work with it? And the short answer is they have to have administrative privileges to make the same changes. Deanna has administrative privileges. At some point, administrators are looking at ways to attack administrative accounts. And what we're doing is something called souring the milk. We're making it a waste of time at first for most hackers. Now, the very sophisticated hackers will run some deeper commands to identify a fingerprint called the security ID. And what they'll soon discover is that the guest account shows the original root account for the guest ID, for the security ID. And then they'll notice that the administrator account is not in the range of numerical values for a security ID. So there are tricks around it, but it usually takes a persistent and a more advanced hacker to get at it. So to answer your question, Bill, they'd have to have administrative privileges in the first place to make the changes. And it's kind of a catch-22. We want them to waste their time on something that will be fruitless. But did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Any questions about reducing the exposure associated with, right? Okay, hearing no questions, what I'd like to do is, can I get you to stop sharing, Deanna?
Sure, let me do that now.
Okay. What I'd like to do at this point is pick up from the current slide. Okay, so we renamed disabled and created a fake account. Now, apart from obscuring default exposures, can anyone think of a single resource that's essential for us to use on the internet whenever we have named resources on a network? What is the single most common resource used when you're out on the public network to access networked resources by name? Let me give you.
Something with tools? Isn't something with tools?
No, let me give you a hint. If you configure your network information with a gateway, but without this entry, you can access everything on the internet. You just have to know the IP address because you can't use the name. what service is it that provides access to numerical host IP addresses, makes it easy for users, so you only have to know the name.
Right, that's the DNS.
That is correct. It is DNS, right? So a single resource failure that creates all sorts of issues for security challenges. Hackers, this is considered like the holy grail of resources. And essentially, when you look at how your network connects, you can enter alternate DNS servers, but basically there have been a lot of documented exploits when it comes to man-in-the-middle attacks. And so it's recommended that an organization maintain their own local custom domain name server. The only problem with that is if their local custom domain name server reboots, hangs up, has to run an update, there can be outages. So they tend to run clusters of domain name services. Still, the clients that are connected in a network have to work in, they're getting those domain name entries from DHCP. So there's a way there's several layers of opportunity for hackers to hijack the DNS assignments. So we're going to look at one workaround that sort of hardwires or anchors reference to DNS service so that hackers can't redirect or deflect or poison the data that's in the DNS stream that would end up redirecting users. And this is the stuff of legends. This is where a lot of the very sophisticated high dollar hacks have occurred. Bank of America, where there's a man in the middle of attack. Every Bank of America user is on a screen and they think it's the Bank of America web server, but it's not. So another thing too are domain group policies. So a member server, it has a computer account, it's a member of a domain, and security policies, computer accounts have what's called a 30-day fuse. And if you have a mobile workforce that use laptops, if they don't connect to the domain network environment, sometime in a 30-day period, their computer account falls off the grid. This makes mobile devices more vulnerable. And so the domain security policies that are in effect on those mobile devices fall off the wagon, so to speak. Within 30 days, they naturally drop off. What do you do to prevent this single source of failure? Or what do you do to prevent, a single exploit with the DNS service that allows systems to be redirected or for man-in-the-middle attacks to be set up? In simple terms, what we're going to do is show you how to configure and test redundant countermeasures for these two known exploits. The hosts file. We have mentioned the hosts file before, have we not? Does anybody remember the hosts file?
Not really.
Okay. Well, let's see if we can jog some memories. So I'm going to go on to Perseus. And I'll go ahead and close this now. Inside here in your networking, you can configure for DNS. And
Excuse me, they're not sharing.
okay, thank you for mentioning that. Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're going to do is show you that inside the Windows directory is a folder called System32, and inside here is a drivers Etsy directory. Does everybody remember this now? Kind of? Sort of? If I edit the hosts file, I can hardwire the way this system points to the domain controllers, the DNS servers, basically, and this is a target for a lot of hackers. They'll put another IP address in here, and then someone else's DNS server points them to a fake server where the screen looks identical. The trick is that this hosts file has been around an awful long time. It's a holdover from the days where we were trying to make Windows compatible with Linux and Unix systems, something called POSIX. In any case, the host system helps define how networking operates on a very low level. The trick is you can't just edit it with anything. You have to start with Notepad and then run Notepad with root privileges. If you run Notepad with root privileges and open that hosts file inside System32, inside drivers, inside Etsy, I change the documents to all files. There's a template that you can modify. And the really tricky part about this is most people don't realize the hosts file is referenced by Windows operating systems before the DNS cache is referenced, before DNS records are requested, something called resolution, right? So before you go out on the internet and try to look up a DNS record, or you check the local cache, this file is referenced before anything else. So to demonstrate how this works, what I'm going to do, in the interest of time, I'm just going to go ahead and demonstrate this and then show you the other security policy interest. We'll finish up on Monday. We're going to open an entry here, and I'm going to put the name of a local server down, Jupiter. And I know that the IP address of Jupiter is 119. And it's a web server. Can everybody see google.com?
Yeah.
So just to show you how this works, I'm making a simple entry to associate a domain name with an IP address. And I'm going to save the file. And then I'm going to flush any DNS cache that might have been used to reference Google in the last day or so. So I'm going to go ahead and flush the DNS on this, ipconfig flush DNS. And now, if this works right, just to help you understand, whenever I get on the web or I use email, it builds up the name address associations in the DNS cache. But in this case, if I go to google.com, it ends up going instead to Jupiter. Put another way, if I hardwire my DNS entries for my domain controllers and my local DNS, no hacker will easily hijack my DNS service to redirect named records and to corrupt the A records and so on, so that they can stage a man-in-the-middle attack. We're going to be running out of time very quickly, so I think what I want to do is, does everybody remember our talk about the Windows, local Windows software update service? There's a role called the Windows Software Update Server, and you can get your Windows updates from a local server instead of from the internet. Does everybody remember this?
Yeah.
Something about this? Okay. Well, once again, if there's a 30-day fuse and you lose the domain association to tell all your systems to get their updates from a local system on the nearby, on the native network, right? So don't go out on the internet to get all your big chunky updates. You have a cumulative update that's 500 megabytes and 1,000 PCs need to do this. It takes forever. If you have a local server that provides that, it's much faster. The thing to remember is that you can set up redundancy on the local security policy as well. Most people are aware in a domain environment that you can enforce configurations with group policy objects. We've talked about this. What most people are not aware is that there are security policies on the local machines as well. And it pays a big dividend to configure the local security policy. You basically go in here, and what you do is create redundant entries so that if the member server loses its way, if it's disconnected from the domain, if the policy can't execute, the local security policy will take over. You have redundancy, you have local security policies that enforce how the firewall works, where the security, the system updates come from, along with other security interests. Let's recap quickly. I apologize for running short on time. So and one of the things to remember about hosts, you want to flush the DNS cache. When you set up local security policy, you want to use a command called gp update force. And if you include this command in the startup scripts for systems, it'll automatically execute so that you have local security policy and then you have domain security policy inside your system. So to summarize, we examined we examined some troublesome defaults that expose systems, like the root administrator account that's created when the operating system is first set up. We described and used a practical remedy to mitigate a default exposure. We reviewed some common single resource exposure scenarios, like a single set of DNS servers. If those are hijacked, that DNS service is so critical, and also domain security policies. We reviewed how to configure, and in your assignment and your solution, we will give you the opportunity to configure those so you can test how that redundant measure works. Monday, our final day of class, we're going to have some special topics. We're going to talk about how to encrypt network traffic with IPsec. We're going to talk about how to harden DNS with split-split, something called split-split. It also thwarts a lot of hacking interests. And we're also going to review in brief public key infrastructure, a way to automate the management of encryption and certificates. Are there any questions before we close for the day?
None for me.
None for me.
I got a quick question, but it's about something else.
Okay. well, let me go ahead and stop sharing and stop recording, and then we can cover that. Going once, going twice. Okay, I hope you have a good weekend. Keep your eyes peeled for the assignments, the related assignments online. And have a good weekend.